The Primacy of Prime, Rachmaninoff's All-Night Vigil, and the Theology of the First Hour. Sergei Rachmaninoff's All-Night Vigil was composed for the idiosyncratic and oft-not-done all-night rite of the Eastern Orthodox liturgy. The service, consisting of several parts of the canonical hours, includes Vespers, Matins, and Prime, also known as the First Hour. A frequently enraging misnomer to Rachmaninoff's Opus 37 is simply referring to it as Rachmaninoff's Vespers. For musicologists versed in liturgical theology, this gross simplification of the all-night vigil to only its first canonical section is not only factually inaccurate, but it discounts the rich theology present in the first hour and in Rachmaninoff's musical treatment of the text from the office. Since the early days of Christianity, monastic communities and early developments in liturgical theology held a primacy for the first hour of daylight in the divine office. The abatement of a night relenting to the morning was the daily and physical reminder of John 1:5. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Indeed, the etymology of vigil, from the Latin vigilia, to keep watch, is laden with biblical symbolism of the soul waiting for Christ as the warden waits for the dawn. Despite Rachmaninoff's somewhat unorthodox adoption of Russian Orthodox Christianity, that is, the lack thereof, this paper presents that his treatment of this ancient liturgical service was more adept than mere musical aesthetic. Rather, the following study argues that Rachmaninoff's extremely sensitive and affective handling of the all-night vigil service is in line with Eastern Orthodox theology of the aforementioned canonical hours, culminating in the musico-theological summa on the final movement of the work, when praise is given to the Theotokos, the Mother of God, who gave birth to the living light. Section 1. History of the all-night vigil service. It is no secret that presentations of Rachmaninoff's Opus 37 have historically taken place within a concert setting, instead of within the liturgy from which the work takes its name. Unlike other masterworks composed or intended for liturgy, what makes Rachmaninoff's choral work different is the obscurity of the all-night vigil service itself. The service is not easily implemented in standard church liturgical life for the obvious reason of the all-night nature of the liturgy. What is more, for us in the West, the divine daily offices as preserved and prayed in the Eastern Orthodox faith have an air of mystery and chasm-like distance to us today. The performativity of the Eastern Rite, especially the Liturgy of the Hours, has never been formally and meticulously written down, nor have they at any point in time been in the province of the average congregant. As the Anglican theologian George Guiver put it, this daily office of the Eastern Church is in a league of its own. Its creators over many generations have fused together material from many different sources, giving the impression of an attempt to preserve, at least in token form, as much relevant liturgical matter as they knew of. Some parts of it are impossible to perform fully, and some have shrunk to a mere shadow. Scattered fragments of old forms lie embedded in it, making it rather like a battered celestial body. Nonetheless, this aforementioned battered body is rich in both liturgical history and theology. Since the early forms of observant worship, weight has been given to evening and to nighttime prayer. The close of day and the encroachment of darkness have long been metaphors for the fragility of the human soul and the oppressiveness of evil. For our purposes, we look now to the New Testament and the immediate template for this rite. In chapter 6, verse 12, Luke writes, quote, "And it came to pass in those days that Jesus went out into a mountain to pray, and continued all night in prayer to God, which the apostles then imitated in both the Acts of the Apostles and in Corinthians. Christians in the following centuries, especially those in what eventually became monastic communities, developed a certain reverence for prayer at night, a practice that soon became widespread in standard liturgical life, following the foundation of the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople and its cathedral chapter. What developed there was the genesis for lay participation in what evolved into the daily office, which unfortunately in the West defaulted to an almost exclusively monastic practice by the Middle Ages. However, the cathedral chapter in Constantinople was absent of an all-night vigil service. Here is where we look to the monastics, no surprise there, of 4th century early Byzantium. The oikoimatoi, sleepless ones, were pledged to perpetual praise of God. Their offices, popularly known as the akoluthia ton oikoimaton, office of the sleepless ones, were continuous and uninterrupted, performed by 3 choirs in succession, each doing 1 8-hour shift per day, an unending cycle of 24 offices, 1 per hour. The first usage of the term vigil came in late 4th century accounts of a Spanish nun while observing anastasis, or resurrection services, in Jerusalem. According to Robert Taft in his History of the Byzantine Rite, these late night services included lighting lamps and the singing of psalms, hymns, antiphons, intercessions, and a dismissal. This basic format endured in the East in the centuries that followed, and indeed after the Great Schism, and was the basic scaffolding of the rite that Rachmaninoff encountered when looking to compose music for the all-night vigil. Section 2, the primacy of prime. It is difficult through the lens of the Western rites to place any sort of primacy on prime, one of the traditional little hours in the Roman breviary. It is, however, still an important service in the liturgy of the hours in the Eastern Rite. For both the Eastern Orthodox and Eastern Rite Christian churches in communion with Rome, the English translation for this service is almost always a variation of the first hour. It is said during that first hour of daylight, which is not to be confused with the preceding canonical hour of lauds, which is observed as the earth begins her transition from darkness into light. The liturgical and theological significance of the first hour is weighty, given its direct parallel to Compline, that hour which earthly light is no more, and the floundering soul must hitch its compass to the cross. Prayer and praising during the first hour of daylight is quintessential resurrection theology. Death has not won, and life springs eternal. There is surety in the daylight, no ambiguity of prevailing darkness, an unshaken affirmation in Christian theology that all believers will be raised from the dead at Christ's second coming. Section 3, Hymn to the Virgin. In his 2015 book, There Is No Rose, The Mariology of the Catholic Church, Professor and priest Aidan Nichols includes an excursus on Eastern Orthodox Marian theology. Nichols states that the Byzantine liturgy, quote, plays a relatively much larger role in Orthodox Mariology than does the equivalent in Catholic Marian thought. Now, before scholars of medieval scholasticism and Western Marian devotion take up arms, it is important to emphasize that Nichols is referring to the primacy of Mary in Eastern Orthodox liturgy over that in Catholic liturgy, not in terms of general devotion, spirituality, or dogma. So how does this manifest? Take the Eastern Rite liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, another service which has seen a great deal of musical treatment, including by Rachmaninoff. In the liturgy, immediately following the consecration of the Eucharist, a Marian hymn is sung. This is a perfect example of Nichols's claim, and it represents a stark contrast in liturgical and Eucharistic theology between the East and the West. The placement of a Marian devotional hymn at the moment Jesus makes himself present at the altar is alone indicative of the Eastern Orthodox view that Mary, the Theotokos, is to be thanked for Jesus' literal flesh and blood. This great parallel is seen at the end of the liturgy for the first hour. At the canonical hour that praises the light once again triumphing over the darkness, the Eastern Rite concludes the hour with the hymn to the Virgin, which is the final and 15th movement in Rachmaninoff's all-night vigil. To thee, the victorious leader of triumphant hosts, we thy servants, delivered from evil, offer hymns of thanksgiving, O Theotokos. Since thou dost possess invincible might, set us free from all calamities, so that we may cry to thee, rejoice, O unwedded bride. Section 4, Rachmaninoff's setting. Movement number 15 is one of only 2 movements in the work based on Greek chant, the other being the more well-known second movement, Blagoslovi Dusha moja Gospoda. The languid, yearning lines and emphasized minor tonalities of that movement are here supplanted by joyous exclamations and ringing major chords in Rachmaninoff's final hymn to the Virgin. Beginning squarely in C major, this lively praise of both Marian ardor and reverence toward the living light is carried out through sprightly and very rhythmic pulses, reaching a deafening peak in the 6th measure at triumphant hosts, of which Mary is their victorious leader. See example 1. The fortissimo of measure 6 is tamed by the decrescendo in measure 8 and is brought to a piano in measure 9, when the jubilant spirit acknowledges its humble servitude to the Blessed Mother at the utterance, we thy servants, see example 2. As their lowly estate remembers that they are to be delivered from evil, the music once again gains volume and momentum. First, a blaring and accented F major chord in first inversion on the weak beat of a measure, see example 3, and then to a C major fortissimo utterance of praise 2 measures later, as we offer hymns of thanksgiving to Mary, the morning star, see example 4. The harnessing of affect by Rachmaninoff is apparent. His heavy use of dynamic marking show of a romantic era penchant for the unbridled stirrings from within, and the very controlled counterpoint and subtle use of adventurous harmony prevents the palate of the music from ever growing stale. The sonic world that Rachmaninoff creates when the name of the Theotokos is invoked on the 6-syllable Bogoroditsye is striking. Beginning with a D minor 7 in first inversion, the soundscape continues to grow to a C major flat 7 in second inversion, then F major, C major without the tonic, F major in first inversion, G major, and finally back to root position C, see example 5. Mary's mysticism does not escape her adoring earthly fans, and the music then shifts to an ethereal sounding and practically bitonal minor superimposition upon describing what the Blessed Mother possesses in nature, see example 6. The very earthly and homophonic sound of Greek chant returns on invincible might, with the bass's boisterous and arcing melodic line that text paints her mighty arm, see example 7. The altos begin the supplication of set us free 4 beats before the collective rallying cry lands together on a flat 7 C major chord in third inversion, see example 8. It is from all calamities that we wish to be saved. Save us from darkness, from within and from without, and catapult us into the daylight, so that we may forever cry to thee in endless praise. This cry of praise in Rachmaninoff's setting grows impatient of quarter note homophony, as the soprano and alto both jump the metric gun, rendering their praise in excited syncopation in beat 3 in this 6/4 measure, see example 9. Rejoice, O unwedded bride. The fortissimo explosion on this text begins the final phrase of Rachmaninoff's work, see example 10. What ensues in these concluding 7 bars is not only the summation of Marian praise, but also the culmination and climax of the work itself. So much of this choral giant has existed in the heart-panging realm of the minor key. In fact, this minor mode dominance and lack of standard Western conventions, like the Picardy third cadences, have now become common associations with the sound world of Russian Orthodox church music. The canon of chants, both imported and incorporated and those natively grown from Russia's own harsh soil, inhabits the land of the lowered 3rd and 7th scale degrees. The affective pull of minor to draw out a certain sense of emotional yearning and elegiacness was not lost on Rachmaninoff, and he no doubt expounded on this sonic manipulation in setting this sacred work. Such is the craft of his compositional hand that this C major chord in the middle of the work's penultimate system exorcises evil, if by no other force than sheer cut and dry tonal allegory. Again, see example 10. Rachmaninoff's sinuous and controlled musical prosody detonates into unabashed jubilation in the final system, see example 11. F major is now alternated with A minor, and the ambiguous tonality of the penultimate measure nonetheless gives way to the final expansively voiced C major chord as seen in this example. The metric irregularity of this final section, for example, 6 beats to a measure instead of 4, as seen here, creates an endless wave of delirious exultation, and the calming texture at the end provides cloaked confidence for the pious listener to go forth into the light of day with blessed assurance. Section 5, we need a Messiah. A question now looms in the air. Did Rachmaninoff mean to do any of it? That is a detailed traditional musico-theological analysis of the all-night vigil appropriate or even possible? Well, the purpose of this study is not a standard musico-theological analysis, and the reason, thankfully, is quite simple. Rachmaninoff was neither a theologian nor a staunch practitioner of Eastern Orthodox theology. With, say, Hildegard of Bingen, there are her rich theological treatises, which often discuss music and theology walking arm in arm. With Bach, there are many primary sources where he made his knowledge and practice of Lutheran Orthodox theology and his own religious piety known. Rachmaninoff does not fall into these categories. However, this does not mean that theology did not meet music in this work. What is more, in the case of the all-night vigil, that theology was in fact highly instrumental in influencing the composer. Rachmaninoff's counterpoint teacher, Sergei Ivanovich Taneyev, was one of these traditional theologically driven composers. As such, Rachmaninoff had a solid education in sacred music, and he also composed the work within the desperate climate of producing Russian Orthodox sacred music in the early 20th century. As Tchaikovsky himself observed, we need a Messiah who will destroy the old with a single blow and stride out on a new path. This new path will mean a return to gray antiquity. The old chants, that is, will be presented with suitable harmonies. Just how these old chants should be harmonized, no one has yet determined, but there are those like Razumovsky, Rimsky-Korsakov, Azayev, who know and understand what Russian music needs. I would like to add Rachmaninoff to that list. The positive critical reception for the all-night vigil was unanimous. Rachmaninoff had accomplished something magnificent. Even Rachmaninoff's harshest critic, Grigory Prokofiev, rendered praise on the work saying, quote, "Its miracle is its fusion of the simple and the sincere." Keskalsky, Russia's most productive composer of church music, summarized this universal praise best. Rachmaninoff's new composition, Night Vigil, is undoubtedly a contribution of great importance to our church's musical literature. One must hear for oneself how simple, artless chants can be transformed in the hands of a great artist. Of unusual value is this artist, Rachmaninoff's, loving and conscientious attitude towards our church chants, for in this lies the promise of a splendid future for our liturgical music. If we can now accept that Rachmaninoff's treatment of the Eastern Orthodox all-night vigil service was attuned at every step to the higher frequencies of the canon of Christian sacred music, and in the rich liturgical theology that developed in tandem with it, we can also accept that Rachmaninoff approached the content of this service seriously. Rachmaninoff was aware of the potent theology of the first hour, and he knew that the final hymn to the Theotokos was not commonplace or anything run-of-the-mill, but rather where living theology and the living light could meet. Thank you.